They were called savages, monsters, demons on horseback. The Comanche, Apache, and Seminole were feared across early America, not just by settlers, but by entire armies. But what if that fear was built on a lie? What if these savage warriors weren't villains, but survivors of a war they never asked for? Long before the first musket fired or treaty was broken, these tribes thrived on their ancestral lands. The Comanche ruled the southern plains, masters of horsemanship and hit-and-run warfare. The Apache roamed the southwest, stealthy, strategic, and impossible to catch. And the Seminole? Deep in the Florida swamps, they built a world no invader could conquer. These weren't primitive bands. They were civilizations, with political systems, spiritual beliefs, and strategies born from generations of survival. But when colonization arrived, everything changed. As settlers moved west, conflict was inevitable. But instead of being seen as defenders of their land, these tribes were painted as bloodthirsty obstacles. Why? Because fear is a powerful tool. Newspapers, politicians, and storytellers of the time spun tales of terror, of raids, scalping, and wild violence. The truth: most of it was exaggerated, twisted, or outright invented. The press sold fear to justify expansion, and that fear became policy. Broken treaties, forced removals, wars dressed as civilizing missions, but what they called savagery was resistance. Let's get something straight. These tribes weren't violent for the sake of violence. The Comanche developed lightning-fast raiding tactics, not to dominate, but to survive. The Apache used guerrilla warfare to fight back when outgunned, outnumbered, and betrayed. And the Seminole? They turned swampland into sanctuary, defying capture again and again during the longest war in US history. Their actions weren't random, they were calculated, fueled by desperation, loss, and a fierce determination to protect their families, traditions, and future. To call that savagery is to ignore the violence done to them. Generations grew up believing native tribes were the villains of the American story. That lie seeped into textbooks, movies, and minds. It justified genocide. It erased humanity. It turned warriors into monsters and victims into shadows. Even today, those old narratives echo in policy, prejudice, and the marginalization of native communities. But truth has a way of surviving, even if whispered, even if buried. Now, native historians and storytellers are rewriting the record, not to erase the past, but to finally tell it right. They remind us the Comanche, Apache, and Seminole weren't America's most feared tribes. They were some of its most resilient. This isn't a story of savagery, it's a story of survival, of cultures that refused to vanish, of warriors who fought not for conquest, but for existence. So, how do we move forward? We start by asking harder questions, by listening to the voices that history tried to silence, and by remembering that behind every myth is a truth, waiting to be heard. If this challenged what you thought you knew about American history, hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. The real stories? They've always been there. You just have to look beyond the fear.